All right, let's get going now that the ball is rolling. Here we go. Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. We're here with an exclusive conversation and interview with the one and only West Coast experimental hip-hop, noise, and everything in between trio. They have a new record out via Sub Pop Records, Dead Channel Sky. A lot of you guys have been enjoying it on the channel, and we're going to talk about that record and anything else that comes up in the conversation. I imagine there will be a lot, since it's really been a minute since they released a new record. It's been a minute since we've talked as well. Jonathan, William, and David Clipping, thank you for coming through. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, man.
All right. So let's let's talk a little lead up to the new album, because obviously it's been a minute since you guys came out with a record. You gave us a lot of material and a lot of heat with your last album cycles in 2019 and 2020. Obviously around the same time, we're talking about like the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns in full swing and everything. So it was a very unique time for anybody to release music, but especially for you guys, because again, it was like such a big couple of projects. I imagine after such a point in time, with all of you respectively having a lot going on in your own lives, which was also the case with the previous couple of records too, that, you know, there was probably a point of separation, or where you guys all needed to focus on your own thing. Like past the point of the last two records, at what time and, you know, through what, I guess, point of inspiration did you guys decide to reconvene? Like what kind of pulled the group back together again to start working on material for this new record?
We never really stopped. We're just slow.
I wish it was like that. I wish it was like, oh, we got to make a record now. It happened.
Yeah.
Generally takes us 4 years to make something.
We made the first song for Dead Channel Sky during the sessions for the horror records, which were made as one project. We thought we were making one record, and then we just realized we had way too much. And we also had way too much for this one, but decided to do it anyway.
So not a triple album release this time around. There was no plan for that.
No.
No, but we usually, what happens is we make a song that doesn't quite fit on whatever project we're working on, and then we save it, and sometimes for a really long time until it comes around. Like Club Down, that was on the horror records, we made that like right after finishing CLPPNG. We started making some more songs, most of which ended up on the Wriggle EP, except for Club Down, which we held on to because we knew we wanted to make a horror record. And so our song this time was Run It, which we made during the horror sessions. Because we were asked to make a song for a video game. Or we weren't asked, we elected ourselves to make a song.
We were invited. Well, the label was invited, and we were
we were invited to submit a song, and we didn't have one that we felt was appropriate, so we made Run It.
Okay.
And then they didn't want it, and they were like, let's make a whole record like this. Yeah.
So that track actually did sort of like end up being a point of inspiration in terms of like, this seems like a direction.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think like it was sort of like, it was one of those things. I don't know that we had really considered like cyberpunk as a genre for us to dig into before, but in working on that song, it made so much sense. So we were like, oh, well, we should probably just, and now we're thinking about it. We're going to have to like run this idea through until we get to the end of it. Is kind of how that always works. Like, well, now it exists in the world, so we're gonna have to see what happens, you know?
Got it. And that was like the game soundtrack at the time that sort of like there was the potential inclusion for?
Yeah, we would have never made a song like that except for an invitation to a video game, and we tried to make we wanted it to sound like a video game song.
Got it.
And like we sort of sat on it, we liked it, but I remember like playing it for friends, and friends sort of all being like, whoa, what is this? This is a cool direction. You should guys push more here. Like people who hadn't heard it before, but were familiar with the bands, when we would just like show it to people, like the reaction was very positive in a way that sometimes showing new music isn't, positive. And
yeah, that's actually true. I mean, all of our friends are like old bravers. So I think like it was definitely like, oh, you finally got good.
Yeah. I made something for us. Yeah.
Like, oh, the tempo's not so slow. I can't pay attention anymore.
I mean, like, kind of speaking to that, and also I imagine there's kind of like an age demographic there that I probably fit into as well. I mean, it kind of, to me, and maybe this isn't the case for a lot of younger people, but at least for me, like, it read to me as being like something that was inspired by a time when I feel like I was just in high school, maybe going into college, and there was like a lot of media around at that time that was sort of like a depiction of the future, the immediate future, sort of like the tech utopia or dystopia that we could be immediately entering into in the next 10 years. And was that like subconsciously kind of operating on some level through what you guys were doing? No.
Very consciously.
Very
very
absolutely at the top of our minds. I mean, the way we talked about Jonathan can.
Yeah, the folder for this album on my computer is still called Hacker Techno, because that's what we were calling the album for a long time. We were like, we want to make music that sounds like surfing through the tubes of the internet. You know?
Yeah, I mean, like this sort of this old fantasy of what the internet was going to be when like they were making these movies about, but before we knew what it was actually going to be like, when we were watching like Lawnmower Man and Strange Days.
Oh my fucking God, Lawnmower Man.
Yeah, man.
And this sort of like what imagine, because the album we say it takes place in 2025, but it's the 2025 that we imagined in 1997, not the one we actually ended up in. Right.
So that's very similar. Yeah,
they're largely very similar. But it's just like way worse now than the fantasy of it would be. Right. I mean, so that was the way we were talking about it. And as a result, you know, like all of the inspiration is that like that when alternative radio in the US sort of decided they needed to find what was coming after grunge, and they hooked onto all these like European dance music genres that were, you know, already imported American music genres, but like got popular in the UK and in Germany and came over here, and all of alt radio was like electronica is the new thing. And this is, you know, what you could, we were trying to imagine what we thought rap was going to sound like in 2025 in 1997. Right. That's the original premise.
And I really like, I mean, I think a lot of my, like the way I approach genre and my taste and the way that I like look for synchronicities and connections, I can really credit to those like electronica compilation soundtracks, which is really a lot of my first exposure to the electronic music that I love and that was so formative for me. But I had no idea when I was first hearing that stuff as a teenager in the early mid 90s, right, that there was a difference between techno and house and drum and bass and trip hop, and like that those things were genred. To me, it was all electronic music, right? It was like electronica, and I still kind of feel that way, I guess. Like I still feel like all music is the same, right? And so we really wanted to make something that felt like a compilation album, like a compilation soundtrack for one of those movies that we had made all the songs for.
Yeah, I mean and we even have like ideas about like each track is by a very different rapper, like, and you know they're each a different person saying these things in a way that, like, I mean, always the sort of the impersonal novelistic approach is there, but these, I think we had more of a an idea of, oh, this is this type of a rapper, this is this type of a rapper, you know, in the way that, like, you know, the Saint soundtrack or the Hackers soundtrack has these sort of like separate perspectives in each track, feels like it's just crammed together, you know.
David, speaking to that, like in the creation of this record, what sort of like characters and perspectives did you find yourself like having to write from on all of these tracks? Were you going into every single song with a clear idea, or were maybe the instrumentals inspiring you to be like, oh, this kind of seems like this sort of person or this sort of like background?
Yeah, I mean, most of the way we work involves like there's sort of usually some sort of instrumental start to an idea, and then we are all kind of talking about what this is. So like we by the time like I start writing words, we're usually sort of in agreement on like, oh, this is the kind of, this is the perspective of this song. But yeah, it was yeah. So what was fun for me in the writing was to kind of imagine world. Imagine imagining a future world that and figuring out what are the different pockets of that world that rappers occupy, right? So we've still got hustlers. There's a ton of drug stuff on the album, but like future drugs are not like current drugs, except they kind of sound like current drugs, right? And but also current is 97. So like there's that stuff going on. There's also all of these wars happening, but where like most people are very disconnected from these wars. So some of these songs are from perspectives of like soldiers who are actively in the wars, like sending their music back to be part of this compilation because somebody asked them to like submit to this thing. And they're, you know, so, and then there's like sort of politically anti-war people, there's politically pro-war people, there's like sort of computers chiming into it, and there's like, you know, there's just all of these kind of different perspectives that existed in this imagined future, all submitting one song, you know.
Yeah. It's you know, it's funny, somebody in chat was already kind of like bringing this up, but I think you're already kind of like saying this is still happening in its own way, but somebody was like, where's the story song? Why wasn't there a story on the album? And it's like, well, there's all sorts of stories on the album still, you know, and maybe in some way, I'm sure in your head, like all of this is connecting because there's a clear concept sort of like driving it all together. Is that sort of like a connection?
Might be a story song.
There might be a story song.
Right, exactly. I figured it's probably something that is like in there and you really have to like think about it. I wouldn't, you know, given how sort of consistently you guys have sort of leaned into that idea up until this point, I don't think it's something you would have completely just abandoned randomly on this new album, especially with it having been so long since it came out.
Yeah,
since you last dropped, I mean.
There could very well be a story song, but you're right in that, like, that story series, I don't know. I mean, I love the feedback we get from the stories and like the way people are like putting them together and figuring out all of the connections that are there and the ones that aren't there that maybe are now because I've read them and I don't know if I made it up or not. So like, right, like that's kind of one of my favorite things that the fans of this band has sort of generated is this like the kind of the deep digging on that stuff. So like keep digging. I think the album rewards some pretty good digging, I think. So yeah, there's stuff on there for you to catch, but also there's I'm sure like any fans who are listening, you will also certainly come up with more things than I did. So
well, yeah, I mean, there are so many things that are like on the internet just accepted as canon about some of those songs that we never thought of, that now we're like, yeah, absolutely, that's totally what that is about. That's those two people, yeah, they're the same person.
Yeah, so keep doing
never, like literally
helpful. It's super helpful when I have to write another story song.
Another thing that's like,
you said something. You asked if the beats inspired David's words, and something I realized we haven't talked about, and that I'd sort of forgotten, is that actually a bunch of times on this record we worked the opposite way, which I really like doing, and we haven't done in a really long time. Like we did a little bit of Mid City that way, and a little bit of LPPNG that way, where David would show up having just written to a tempo with no preconception of what the beat would be. And then Bill and I would make something around those words. And we did that a couple of times.
Yeah, times on you.
For some of the shorter tracks, like I think like Go was written that way, right? And Madcap, maybe?
No, that was our second attempt at a Pansonic beat that was sitting around in the folder for a year.
Madcap was? Oh, yeah.
What kind of beat you said there?
Pansonic.
The Finnish electronic group Pansonic.
Okay.
That's how we talk about these things. So like, it
sort of reminds you of a
like
certain thing.
Pansonic, but you know, our versions of like certain artists that we care about that we were, you know, trying to make this, you know, fake compilation out of.
Well, the titles change a lot too, like, and more so on this record, I think, than any other. Like, you know, usually the beat has a name that's evocative to me and Bill, and then David writes to it, and then the name changes, and then we're done, right? And then the beat is no longer called what it used to be called. It's called the new thing. But on this record, like, a lot of these songs change titles a lot, and I actually genuinely still have trouble remembering where we landed on some of them. So I may not.
I mean, that's it's funny. Some of these interviews we've been doing, they make a really big deal out of Dead Channel Sky being a reference to, William Gibson's Neuromancer, and like I have to keep reminding myself that we didn't land on that title until the album had been mastered and the Ian, who was doing the artwork, needed something to write on the cover. Like we had like 15 titles we were like bouncing between. So this idea that somehow we had made a rap retelling of Neuromancer is like pretty ridiculous. But
yeah, it's pretty funny. But also, that's totally true. That's what we did.
It's fine. Yeah, do what we sure.
Well, speaking of like some of the points of inspiration or sort of like the way that you went about creating some of these tracks, I know you guys are like no strangers to performance art and sort of like process based music and stuff like that. And I wanted to sort of ask, like, I'm kind of getting a sense of that off of like the Degradation interludes on the record. I wanted to ask, like, what exactly was the way that you created those tracks to make them sound the way that they do? What makes them significant as sort of like placements within the album? And was there like a certain kind of like, production or sort of like synthesis process that you guys went through to sort of create those sounds and ingrain them into the record?
Well, it's actually a composition from the late 80s by a friend of mine, Mark Trail, who composed music for his network computer music group called The Hub. And Bit Panic are all former students of Mark's who formed to sort of continue performing the music Mark wrote for that group. Mark passed away a handful of years ago, but Bit Panic still play his music, and the pieces are all instructions on basically how to send some sort of messages between musicians whose computers are networked together. So the sound is up to the players, but there are various, I mean, in that one particularly, it's a certain like plus strong wave shape that is called a pluck that is sent to everyone's instrument, and they have their own parameters in their own instrument, but they all sound at the same time and degrade at the same rate and at the same time.
Yeah, everybody had. So along with the members of Bit Panic, I inserted myself into that group, and we all had our sort of custom pieces of software that we performed that live over the internet across continents, because Scott's in Europe. But the plucks. So everybody has a set of plucks. I forget how many. I made the plucks actually out of David's voice, out of like a little.
Of course you did.
Voice. And everybody had those like 110 wave files or whatever they were on their computer, and then we would receive an instruction from the leader computer, which was Casey Anderson was sending the plucks, and you would get a pluck number, so you would know which pluck you were supposed to pull from, and then a length. So we would play the pluck at that rate to get that length out of it, but we weren't allowed to use any audio from the plucks, only whatever analysis tools we could come up with for pitch and amplitude or whatever data we could pull out of the pluck happening to then drive our own synthesis engine. And that's, I think the plucks I made are a lot like wackier than probably was the original intention in the 80s. Like they're really all over the place, and calling them plucks is really generous. But I
don't know. Those guys were pretty wacky in the old days.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea, it's, we've done these things where we like faithfully perform a piece of like important historical electronic or like new concert music on a number of the albums, and rather than close with it.
Right.
Yeah, most of the albums close with it. We wanted this one to be sort of interludes. I mean, the whole album is also supposed to feel like this early, like the density, like that's why there's shorter tracks, and like is that sort of like Paul's Boutique, early De La Soul, like sample heavy density. We were looking for that sort of like overwhelming information of that era, the way that like I just remember being a little kid and like finding like things like Paul's Boutique or Fear of a Black Planet, there's like this sort of dense forest with like short tracks and weird things and just samples and just like this chaos of this collage like assembly of the album that we were trying to go for. So having these having the like the classical piece split up over the album into these sort of bizarre things that interrupt the album was and that I'm always looking for like what piece could fit the themes of the album in a way, right? So this being these very 80s 90s very futuristic at the time compositions for like they were doing this with giant desktop computers in like 1985 on like local area networks that could only send like basically on or off to each other. But this sort of fantasy of this future of what the future of music was going to be, right? So like this is always about this whole album is about like old visions of the future, right? What looked like the future in the past. So it's like always this sort of like you're seeing through all these eras, like transparencies on top of each other, right? Like it's an old composition that at the time was very futuristic, but now updated to sort of it's pre World Wide Web composition that uses the internet now.
Were there any other, I guess, like stipulations that came into play when, especially when working with some of the collaborators on the record? I mean, maybe, some are kind of obvious and on the surface, like, the Tia feature, for example. Obviously, like what she says and raps on that track plays so clearly into the overall theme of the song. She's like an essential voice and character within the track. But, kind of conversely, you also have guitarist Nels Cline on the record doing a really experimental and strange solo on, the album. When going into a crossover like that, was there some kind of like idea or narrative or sort of like, cluing in that you needed to do to be like, well, we're doing this kind of album with this kind of narrative, so your performance needs to adhere to this or do that or whatever?
Well, so Nels got exactly what was going on, because what I said was we want to do a tribute to those old home recordings of Derek Bailey playing over drum and bass pirate radio. Do you want to do not a Derek impression? I wanted him to sound like Nels, but what would you have played if you found if you tried to play along with pirate radio drum and bass or jungle tracks in the early 90s? And like, I don't think I gave him much instruction at all. I mean, he just knew those recordings and was like, yep, got it, on it.
Was there any sort of a explanation that needed to go into, I don't know, for example, the Aesop Rock feature? Because I know he's a pretty typical creative in terms of like, his own tracks on a lot of his records being very narrative based and conceptual. And, it seemed like you guys were very much in lockstep creatively on that one.
Yeah. I had texted him and was like, here's the idea. And he was like, yep, got it. Like, yeah, I mean, it is like such an Aesop Rock type of thing, but I was like, it's like recruitment for a future army, but you're just playing video games. But also, like, this is also like the recruitment is about escapism and like a return to nature. Imagine like Mist or something like that. And he was like, on it, yep, love it. And like said back the best verse that's ever been on a Clipping album. I think that's so fucking good. Jesus.
I don't know. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just think we make things for people. We don't just like go looking for features. So generally, we haven't ever had someone, come back to us like ever in our career. I mean, like LeChat and Gangsta Boo, like everyone's always just heard a sort of a bare minimum of a hey, we want you to do this kind of a thing. This is kind of what the song's about, and everyone's just been like, got it, yep. Like, we've really not had to have a lot of back and forth about any of this stuff that I can think of. Unless
I was going to say our curation of features has gotten better, but it hasn't. It's always been good. I think in like pre-clipping projects, I didn't know how to do this, is what I'm sort of thinking of. But like but like many times, like the just having that person on that track is the thing that's in theme with the whole album. So like we've kind of just set them up to do what they do, and if they do what they do, then it will feel theme appropriate, right? And and that's not to say we don't tell people what kind of album we're making or what kind of thing we're doing, but I think we all expected when we started like being able to reach out, like on CLPPNG, being able to reach out to like people we didn't know for features. We expected like pushback because the beats we expected the beats to be too weird, but that's never been a problem.
That was, I think, a big eye-opening moment for me early on, because it's always been true for me, but I didn't know that like rappers are just like that, right? Like I've only worked with who I've worked with. You sort of we're so siloed into our, like, particularly in rap music, into our particular corners of the genre. But rappers fucking rap, man, and like good rappers are good rappers over anything, and also like tend to be. We've all. No matter who you are, like if you've been doing this for long enough, like you've done it over every type of beat there is. Like there's not really, I used to think like, oh, this is going to be too weird. Like we need to create a spine, or like we're going to surprise this person. It's never happened. And so like, it was a lesson I learned a long time ago. Like when around CLPPNG, I was like, oh, right. Because Gangsta Boo has been rapping as long as I've been alive. You know what I'm saying? Like, why would anything surprise her? Like, that's not,
Right.
She was only like 4 years older than us.
I just think that because I've been listening to her so much longer than
I know. Well, she did her first song. She's like 12, so
yeah.
Like, she has been rapping a long time. But I
was just going to say, also rest in peace, one of the goats.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
I do miss recording in person with people. Like it has moved to a point where like all of our features are collected remotely, and it used to be that like one on an album would be, but like on CLPPNG, Cock Pistol Creek came over to my house. We recorded Gangsta Boo in person. We recorded King T in person. Juice turned his in remotely, but that was it, right? I think. I don't remember who else is on that record. I think those are the ones. Right? But I do kind of miss that because it was a lot of fun to get to hang out with like people that we admire and sort of watch them work. Because also, I mean, I think Cree showed up with her verse written, but everybody else heard the track for the first time at the session and wrote their verse on the spot in front of us. And like King T, that's one of my favorite sessions that I've ever been at or done, because he refused to punch in or do anything but complete takes of the entire verse. He wrote on paper in a notebook, and he would and to do overdubs with like one word, he would run the whole thing. Like every time, very much like
old school
tape in the 80s. Like I still work that way. It's still the best way to work. And I love that verse, and his performance was so fucking precise. He would be like, oh, I didn't like the way I said that one word, roll the whole thing back, and he would do the whole thing exactly and then change that one thing, and then move it. Yeah, it was amazing. Incredible.
David, do you ever hold yourself to a similar standard? I mean, it's something I have to wonder, especially given like just how intense and speedy and detailed so many of your verses are. I imagine it's a pace that's difficult to keep up sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I did like grow up recording like that too. Like I was never allowed to punch in, so like I still leaned in that direction, and I think like I still like, and it also depends on who I'm working with. If I'm doing it by myself, I'll cheat more. Our mixing artist Steve, if I'm recording at his house, I always have to do the whole thing 1,000 times, and I think when I'm doing it with these guys, it's somewhere in the middle. It's like we'll run it until it's very clear that I can't do a thing properly, and then we'll start punching it.
It's barely ever. It's almost always a complete take. Almost every verse is a complete take, and what often happens at Steve's is you've done like 6 complete takes that are really good, and then he'll cut 2 together.
Right. Yeah,
and that's when it's done. But usually they're all performed straight through. And honestly, I mean, you almost always, I mean, the thing about that's crazy about David is, the way we generally work, it's harder, post COVID and we're all in different cities and whatever. But
Hmm.
generally, Jonathan and I have made some stuff. David comes over, he goes upstairs because the studio used to be in the downstairs. Everything's moved now, but we would keep working on something downstairs and he would write to something that we had already made. He would come down and we would set up the mic and he would be like, hey, I think I wrote something. And he will deliver it pretty much as recorded, like straight through once. So like the very first time we hear his verse, it sounds like the finished song. He would get through it the first time, almost every time, even if it's imperfect and we wouldn't put it out that way. His first take is always the whole fucking thing. So it's always crazy. Like we'll just be working on something. He'll come down and be like, oh yeah, I got something. And then Jonathan and I will sit there and hear the song for the first time, just straight out of his mouth. And it'll be that.
Yeah, because I'm old. I've been used to working like that. And then, but then like the process of recording is important for me. It's important for me to pay attention to and start switching the occasional word up if I really can't get through it, because probably I'm going to have to do this live at some point. And like that's a whole different beast. And so like it is, I've become aware, like as we're recording, okay, this thing is really hard. Is it hard because I just need to learn how to breathe appropriately, or is it hard because I need to change some words in here? And sometimes it's like, give me a second, flip a few words around, okay, because the plosives aren't in the right place, or like whatever, the weird technicality of fast rapping is a whole thing. But yeah, somewhere like looming in the distance is always like, fuck, if anybody likes this song, I'm gonna have to do it in front of people. So I gotta be ready for that.
One thing about this record that your rapping sort of hit me, like I was like, man, you guys really stood out, especially from like a rap perspective when you first kind of like broke with your early stuff. And I feel like with now 10 plus years of rap evolution and history having happened since then, I feel like what you do stands out even more. It feels like there's even less to compare it to in terms of like what you guys are doing flow wise, and lyrically too. At this point, especially, do you feel like you're the torchbearer for something that is just like continuing to like go out like the dinosaurs or something right now in terms of like your process and your style?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, like we just can this is the only way the three of us know how to work, and
right.
So like it is what it is. Like sometimes it would be nice to be able to work it some other way, like
right.
Sometimes like I look at what the kids are doing, I'm like, man, they're having so much fun. Like making rap songs is so fucking hard. Like like, maybe it shouldn't be this hard, but it's also, this is the way we work, and it's like so rewarding. When it feels good, it feels really good. I mean, I think the reason we're still doing it is like there's not really a high like it. Like when you finish a song and it like feels like the thing you were trying to make. I've said this before about this band, like, because I make music in other contexts too, less and less these days. But like, this is the only project where I've ever set out to do something and then we do it. Right. Like we're going to make this thing, and what finishes is what we said we were going to make. Maybe it's not exactly how we thought it was going to sound, but like it's not, which is so different than like the mode of rapping. Like when the other ways that I rap, where it's like, we're just throwing verses out there and we're going to see what happens. It's like, no, this is like so focused. And so like the reward when the song is finished is like incredible. Because like that's not a lot of things in life that work that way, actually, where you're like, hey, I want to do this, and then you do it. It really doesn't happen that often. I don't know, not in my life. And there's a lot of sort of happenstance and like falling into things and like, this was cool also, but it's not what I thought I was making. This is the only band where I'm like, we think of a thing and then we make the thing.
Phil and I always used to say, I feel like I remember us saying this, right? I certainly used to say this, but I think you did too. I would be like, well, I don't like making music, but I like having made music. And I think I've come to a point now where I actually really like making music, because otherwise that's fucking unsustainable, right? Like you can't like live your life doing a thing you hate every day. So I found a way to really enjoy the process in a way that I used to be very product oriented, and I'm hopefully now sort of in between. But but this band is definitely like goal oriented in that way, right? It's like we do set out to do a very specific thing, and don't stop until that succeeded, right? Like until we've gotten there.
Speak to that a little bit deeper if you could, because I feel like this is an important point to make in the current kind of content and creative paradigm, because I feel like with more and more prevalence of like AI art, which we've been seeing on social media a lot lately, and stuff I've covered on the internet, like these sort of like AI music generation engines, which are being pitched by tech bro CEOs who are like, man, making music's really fucking lame and it sucks. And everyone hates making music, which is like why my product is great, because it sort of takes all the brain power and everything that's hard about making music out of it. And you can just click a few buttons and then say, I made a song, and I mean, the musicians who I know and appreciate, like those things that a lot of people say are hard or are the worst, like they actually enjoy that process and they enjoy the technical stuff and they love assembling things and they love putting things together. But still, there is a difficulty to it. There's a learning curve. It can be a struggle, despite those hard moments that you were just speaking of, and, maybe something beyond just the accomplishment of having finished a thing. Like what else kind of continues to drive you to that process and continues to keep your, nose to what you're doing, even though there may be sort of like obstacles and humps along the journey?
Yeah, I mean, of course you love it. The thing you're talking about is like so insane to me. What do anything else then if you don't like making music? Like
right?
There's too many people making music already.
That's awesome. Do something else. But like, it is such it's hard, but all we have is the process. If you make it right, like, I mean, I guess music's a little different because we'll go out and perform it too, but that's another like process thing. Like once the album is done, I don't listen to it anymore. Like right. Except when I have to learn the song to perform it. Like my experience of anything that I make, this is true of our music, is true of movies and whatever else I make too. Like my experience of it is just the grind of it. It's just the actual creative phase. Once it's released, like that's for everybody else. So like you really do have to love this part. And it is like I said, like there's not anything like it. And when you devote like enough time to it, you do start looking for ways to challenge yourself. You want to make it harder and better and different, just different. What can I do that I haven't done before, right? So when you talk about particularly like cadence and flows and stuff and like the speed and stuff, I'm like, I pushed myself in a lot of different ways. And like, kind of what I loved about the process of this album, I think for me, just from a writer's side, is like, I think there's a bunch of things on this record I had never done before. Lyrically, some of my favorite lyrics of all time are on here, but some cadences I had never tried before. There's like there's modes of storytelling I hadn't done before. And it's cool to be doing something for this long and to still find new ways to do it. Like that's amazing to me,
Yeah. I mean, and I think the whole question of like the AI music generation is like really interesting for us, because like as a group whose sort of central premise is this utterly depersonalized thing, right? Like to take David's I, take the I, the self out of it. There is almost this sense that like there is this artificial intelligence at work in our, but can you imagine listening to these songs and not thinking there was like a light behind the eyes of the person who made it? Like it's art is like a communicative act. I don't appreciate I think trees are pretty, but I don't appreciate a tree like I do a piece of art the same. You know what I mean? Like, I don't appreciate sort of random assemblages of attractiveness. It's like I want a communication with another person. Like, I don't want to just read random words, even if it looks like, even if it's the most impersonal shit. Like, I will listen to, a fucking 30 minutes of just unchanging wall noise, but that's because I know a person made that choice. There's a human on the other end of that who turned those knobs, pushed record, then dubbed it onto a tape and hand folded the J card and sent it to me. Like I'm not interested in art decoupled from some sort of like a soul or intelligence or like a thought behind it. That's all I care about, is that other human at the other end of it. It's communicative that way. Like it's so repellent to me that the idea is that somehow this product, even if it's good, even if it's a great song generated by AI, I will never care because it's not a person trying to tell me something. You know?
I totally agree with you. But I also, there is a lot of AI art that I actually quite like, but it's always because it's a human being exploring the edges of what the AI is capable of and like pushing it past its comfort zone and making it break and making it fail, you know? And I think that stuff is really interesting. And in those ways, I sort of, to play devil's advocate a little bit, right? Sometimes I'm just seeing AI as like, well, it's another tool in this long list of tools that we have started using to make art that the previous generation has decided was cheating or a shortcut, you know? Basically everything we use in our studio is something that somebody like 20 years older than us would be like, that's cheating. You can't use that. Right? Use a computer to make music. You record something and then you only have to do it once, right? That's cheating, you know?
Yeah.
What was his name? The guy who did the laughing song or whatever,
who had to record it thousands and thousands of
records.
times.
He had to just record it thousands. Right? Like, like according to him, right? You know,
I'm sure he would have preferred to not have to do that.
Well, eventually he didn't, and then he didn't make any money.
I know that's true. Yeah, that's a terrible story.
Companies took all the money.
No, I mean, you know, and I've said this before in my content. There's nothing inherently wrong with it as a tool. It's more sort of like the implementation of it. A lot of the time, that's disgusting to sort of like, and even create cheaper, more worthless versions of things that we already have, or sort of like cut musicians out of work. In terms of like, you know, creating music or background stuff to fill playlists with on streaming platforms, or, you know, train these models on other people's work without permission or giving them any kind of like credit or money or anything.
Yeah, it's the language around it. It's the music's hard. Why don't you just do this? It's that part that, you know, that's right. It's the whole culture around it. It's not the tool. The tool doesn't have the tool doesn't have any sort of, it doesn't have a thought. It's not, the tool isn't evil, right? That's how it's used as evil.
That being said too, we did use a few, like an AI voice generator a little bit on this record. We played around with them a lot. We like built a model out of David and like ran a bunch of stuff through it and like tried to generate stuff for the album. And I think the only thing that's left is the very, very last voice that you hear at the end of Ask What Happened.
And at the end of the intro.
Oh yeah, because those are
it's the same thing.
I took a lot of recordings of I was using the 11 Labs voice modeler, and I discovered that you can feed it anything. It doesn't have to be a human voice. You can feed it, you know, tons of material of some sound and say, oh, this is a human voice, and it'll build you a voice model. So I just sent it like hours and hours of raw PCM modem recordings and had it make me a human voice out of that, and then had that words. So that's on the record. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about that I think is interesting, right? Like, that's cool that you can do that.
No, it's
you know,
I always love talking to you guys about some of what goes into these records instrumentally, because it seems like even some of the simplest or some of the moments you aren't even necessarily thinking about as deeply as maybe you should are like, oh yeah, there's this whole sort of like insane, crazy process that you know, I went through to create this one single drum hit that you hear at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. But you know, with that being said, though,
certainly an easier way to do almost everything you do, but like it wouldn't communicate the same thing if you did it easy.
well, with that being said, I feel like, you know, with facts like that, and you know, some of what you were saying earlier, I think it was Jonathan who said something about, you know, the production within the group genuinely being perceived as, you know, weird and unorthodox. And, you know, going back even further, you mentioned like showing some of the material you were working on with this record, like with some of your old raver friends, and them saying like, "Oh wow, it's like it's good now. Oh, this is great. This is cool." Do you guys feel like, despite all the processes and various experiments that might have went into these songs, do you feel like advertently or inadvertently, in a way, you sort of developed maybe your most accessible album this time around? I don't know if it's like a conscious deviation away from like maybe more of the what maybe people generally could perceive as like, oh, this is noise, this is noisy, this is very noisy, or if it was something else that sort of like led to things kind of turning out in the fashion that they did. Was it merely just like maybe just going more in the direction of the dance beats? I don't know, but it sort of seems like through one means or another, you guys ended up making a pretty listenable clipping album. And I mean, obviously, like, I think they're all pretty listenable. They're all interesting to me, but whenever I've shown people the group in the past, they're always like, I don't know so much about that, but it kind of seems like what you've made here can, appeal to a wider audience this time around, potentially.
I think one of the things that occurred to us, I mean, because we had made the one song and then we needed things that go with it, right? But one of the things that had occurred to us is that, we figured out pretty early on that we couldn't make our live shows feel like how we want our albums to feel, right? Because the albums are really like super isolating, like listen to you in your bedroom with the lights off and stare at your speaker and fucking feel bad. And like no one actually wants that. Like nobody wants that. And we do have to go out and we do have to go out and play these for people. So our shows are, they're parties. I mean, they're rowdy parties, and it's not exactly a rave, but it doesn't look all that different from a rave. So I think going into this, we kind of figured out that like, oh, this is also like these are going to be really well received live tracks, no matter what. Right. Like it's already, they're going to go, there's always tracks we can't really play live that we love that are just not, they just don't feel like they work in a live environment, that are some of the more like slow, low key, miserable stuff that we've done in the past. And like these ones, like, we just sort of knew this one's going to mix into this other song that we know goes live. It's like, I had
this thought too, that we also until this year, we hadn't toured in the US in a number of years. So like there was also something, I think maybe you are always in conversation with your live show, right? Like that, because we're performing even when we're not making music. And so like the feedback that we are getting, that I'm getting actually from the music, is when we're playing songs, right? And I do remember having conversations like, we haven't had like a really aggressive, like up tempo, like moshy song since Face, really, you know what I'm saying? So that's like Change the Channel was like that, it was like there were these things that we were talking about in terms of the show, but also like our feedback was particularly European in the last 4 years too. We hadn't been playing in the States. And so I don't know, I didn't think about that consciously when we were making this record, but like there might be some of that in there too, is that like, shows there do like, it's just, there certainly has been some like UK and European influence on this record, even without thinking about it, at least for me, because, and also the genres we were mimicking were like being returned to us from them stealing from us also. So like, we're in conversation anyway. But I had that thought earlier today. I was like, well, yeah, we haven't played in the States really at all, but we have been playing overseas quite a bit.
And
yeah,
I think
it's like, go on.
You suggested maybe this is the most like pleasant and accessible like sound palette that we're using. I think a lot of it, because we're really like, we're referencing sort of specific electronic music genres, and the signifiers of those are like specific sounds that we can't really get away with without using. Like the second you don't use that sound, it's not a reference anymore. So we have to have the 303, we have to have the like 909 kick and snare, we have to have like some things we like just, normally, like sometimes we would make songs in the past with like sort of conventional drum sounds and then replace them with other sounds later. or keep one or something, you know, like, but certainly an original rule of this band was that we weren't allowed to use drum sounds, right? And a very few, like on Mid City, we immediately break that rule pretty quickly. But like, but on this record, we kind of couldn't do that and have it still feel like be referential to the things we were trying to be referential to. And I like to think that we've gotten to a point in this band where we have enough of an understanding of what the band sounds like that we actually don't need to be as like rigid about our palette rules, that we can bend them and still make things that feel like a clipping song. And so I think a lot of the tracks on this record like fall into that category. There are also some really out there sounds on it too.
Yeah, but I do think but we also talked about like the quality of noise and like what digital distortion sounds like as opposed to even so like also it just might be like a less aggressive, like less, you know, it might be like because that kind of, I mean, my Zoom just glitched out for a second and it felt like a lot of the music we have on the record, you know, like it just might be stuff we're a little more accustomed to maybe. But,
I don't know that any of this made it on, but I did a ton of stuff in lockdown, like pinging things back and forth across multiple Zoom instances and like making feedback and like trying to intentionally choke my internet bandwidth to like.
There's some that Flieger made that I used in
some of the and stuff. That's right. Yeah. So I will say, like, what this record doesn't have that usually all of our records have had, and this wasn't intentional, we just never thought of it. Usually we have some really elaborate real world thing that we need to go out and record with microphones that takes fucking forever and is impossible to do, like the drums in Dream, or the car drive-bys in Run for Your Life, or burning a piano. Or, you know, like they're all like, usually our records have this like really obnoxious, insurmountable like field trip that we have to take to accomplish something. And this one, because of the nature again of the things we're trying to reference, really happened like in the box and in the studio a lot more than our previous records. There are fewer field recordings on this record.
I imagine though there had to be some kind of, as you were kind of alluding to earlier, some kind of search though in the process of like, because again, it seemed like you guys were doing a series of homages in a way to a lot of different styles of electronic music. Did that require a lot of like digging and researching into like, oh, this type of song during this time period used this breakbeat or this drum pattern? Are we finding a sample? Yeah. Are we creating it from scratch? Are we finding or seeking out a certain synthesizer or sort of like, you know, bass module that made this certain sound at this time period?
Honestly, man, like, I think Bill and I spent our whole lives already doing that.
Right. I know. Honestly, it didn't take a lot of digging. That shit's at the top of our heads. Like,
you were built for this moment. Is what you're saying. Like you.
I'm trying to think of like. I mean, I bought the 303 we used for this record. Like I had a bunch of clones and things, and we sort of iterated through a bunch of clones. We ended up with the DinSync RE303 clone, which I decided sounded the best, without short of buying a real 303, which is like wildly expensive and impossible to do.
Right.
But like a lot of the stuff I already had, like I've been collecting synths for a long time, and back before it was prohibitive to get things like a real 808 and a real 909. So I have those and we've used them before, but we got to use them sort of like for what they were intended, or not what they were intended, but what they became known for, you know?
Yeah, because rave music was not what any of those were intended for either. I mean, the 303, the 303 was supposed to be like the left hand on your organ. You're supposed to play over that, and it doesn't.
There's that amazing print ad of Oscar Peter on a piano with a 303 next to him.
So weird. They so misunderstood what the fuck that thing sounded like.
Yeah.
There was a lot of like breakbeats were a thing. Yeah, those often are. I mean, every time we've tried to use that, it's a bit of a search to find the right one.
There's only a couple of like classic breaks on the album though. Like there's some amens in there, but and some
and a think about it.
Yeah. but like, oh yeah, totally. But a lot of the break beats that sound classic are things that we constructed.
Yeah.
Like the break beat and keep pushing that comes in for like 2 bars. We made that.
Yeah.
I wanted to maybe sidebar for a second and ask you guys something that I've kind of been wondering about due to music trends and, you know, the recent, year or so. And just ask you guys about the wonderful Tipsy cover that you put out a while ago. Like, since the release of that song, obviously Shabuzi has had a #1 with his own version of that track. I don't know. I'm just going to say, explain yourselves. I'm just, why didn't your version go #1 first? And what is it that you feel like? I mean, I prefer your version. What do you feel like Shabuzi's country version of the song has that yours doesn't? That sort of like, was like the special sauce.
Singing?
Well, we appreciated learning that Shabuzi is such a big Clipping fan. Clearly, that was important.
Obviously,
it's real flattering.
There's that too.
Yeah. I really like that Shabuzi cover, I have to say. What's funny about that Tipsy song is, again, like, we started playing that a bunch in Europe, and like they do not have the frame of reference for Jaquan. Turns out, which
is unfortunate, and I mean, an L for them culturally. But go on.
No, but it was just like a kind of funny thing we were doing, like out there, like it was fun for us, for me to be like, anybody remember Jaquan? No, all right.
Well, it seems he actually has more cultural capital than we thought.
I'm glad that was.
Well, we did that because that was for the Stereo Gum. Stereo Gum was like they invited a bunch of people to cover a song that came out between 2000 and 2010 or something. I don't remember, but we were like, we don't do covers. Like, that's a silly thing. We're not going to do that until it sort of occurred to me that I think Tipsy is maybe one of the great rap songs of that period. Like, definitely, like. I mean, he's not exactly a one-hit wonder, because there was another single that's also very good, but like I think about how hard those fucking drums are in the original all the time. It's like, I mean, that and Grindin', and they were like a year apart, are like two of the greatest drum sounds in hip hop history. Like, just hard as fuck, like banging on lunch table beats. So we kind of we figured we had to do it.
No, I just had to ask you guys that, just because I thought it was such a funny thing.
I don't know why we didn't chart higher with that one.
Yeah.
I think it's a failure of management, probably.
I would put it to management too.
Blame the fact that the B-side is a bunch of field recordings, so from midnight to 6 a.m. in South Central Los Angeles by our friend Christopher. It's all Flieger's fault.
Flieger's fault.
The B-side torpedoed us.
Yeah, the B-side does tend to hold things down if it's not as good as the A-side. That's true.
It's brilliant. It's a fucking great track.
Common refrain in single. You guys were talking about the ways that your live shows have sort of manifested in the past, and how some of this new material with the tour coming up is going to play into that sort of vibe very well. Is there anything else that you're going to be doing or planning to do to kind of like lean into that kind of thrilling raver to sort of I guess like energy
of pretending you like that shit?
Right. Oh, stop. Yeah. No, I mean, look, this was very nostalgic for me, because like it really did take me back to that era where I was like hearing a lot of that constantly. But still, regardless, is there anything else that you're going to be planning to do during the live show to sort of like lean into that further, or kind of like, I guess, or really make the dystopia come to life for everybody in person?
I don't know. The show is sort of just an ever evolving thing, and when we like have new material and start like figuring out how to add it in. It sometimes like takes, so we've played a few shows now, and like we're figuring out new ways to add. So I don't know, we have a new, like, we're most of the time touring with a new person also, which is like fucking cool. That's actually like the biggest change to the show actually is our friend Sharon is playing keys and singing with us often. And that has been actually like the greatest, like the thing that has changed things most is like a new kind of energy and sound palette and like opportunities to do stuff even with old material. That's just different than we've done it before. And I don't know, for me, I had this sort of the first handful of times we played with her, I had it suddenly felt scalable. The show felt scalable in a way it hadn't for me in a long time. Like there's the thing that we do and we're very good at it. But like, I don't know, like now it feels like we could manipulate it to a lot of different venue sizes and conditions that we maybe couldn't have before, because like it's a little bit more than just this one thing now. So yeah, I'm excited for the upcoming shows, not necessarily because they're going to be ravier, but because like there's a bunch of new information we have now to keep like playing with. And sort of like for us, like the shows are like everything else we do. We're constantly tinkering with it and being like, oh, we should try this. And like, we also don't really, different than most rap shows, like these ones don't stop. Basically, there's not breaks between songs. It's just like one sort of continuous mix of music and noise. And
we've always done that.
Yeah, I mean that's why I think the new songs stand out less in a live context than as an album, because of we've always done that where the shows are continuously mixed like a DJ set anyway, and we always play like these really hype songs. Like I don't actually think some of the dancier ones on the new record stand out in a live context. I think the live text makes them make more sense because we generally we don't have to like stop and do a section of the new album. They actually like pretty much fit right into, I mean, there's an old song on either side of each of them when we do it live, and it all feels like it's, one thing. To me, I don't know, you could ask, I don't know, the kids at the shows seem to
so far so good.
So far so good.
All right, well, I'm going to let you guys go. I'm sure you have a lot to do. I appreciate you coming through and just shedding more light on the album and just everything that went into it. Because again, I know you guys are so process oriented and very detail oriented with everything that you do.
Thank you, man. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having us. Always good to talk to you.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good rest of your night. And I'm going to try to make it out to one of those shows. I want to see, it's been years since I've seen you guys live.
I know, it's been like 10
years. Yeah, man. Let us know. Whichever one you want.
I will.
Or
all right. Have a good one, guys.
All right.